So as far as our agenda goes today, shifting left, shifting right, the feedback loop, observability, and then putting this into action. Okay. So who am I? I am the Director of Engagements here at SAUCELABS. I've got 15 years of experience in consulting, corporate IT, and in tech, most specifically in test automation. And along with Marcus Merrill, I run our field services team. So we help our customers realize the value of automation as fast as possible. And our focus is really around that storytelling. So making sure that quality has a seat at that table. We're really interested in how this works with DevOps and with the digital transformation efforts that are happening at your company. And I spend a lot of time with some of our key customers helping to describe those stories so that the rest of our customers can actually get this right and are encouraged to do so. About me personally, I am an avid traveler, and so this has been really hard being grounded. This is me at the controls of a plane, and there I am in Beijing and in Buenos Aires and in Steamboat, all at the end of 2019. And so very, very different to this point right now. Places that I've called home. I'm originally from Nova Scotia. I was raised in Texas, and I live in New York, kinda. So I haven't actually been in New York since March 19th. These are the last pictures that I took from New York and the first pictures that I took from Canada right before the borders closed. And this is a talk that's about signal and observability. And I thought that they were important to share and just a little bit of personal to share. But this is me completely alone in a lounge and on a flight that is built for 200 people where we only had 7 passengers that were traveling in. It was maybe one of the most stressful flights. I travel quite frequently, but this one was very different. And I've been on flights that there haven't been a lot of other passengers, but this was obviously felt different. And it was because we were dealing with COVID and they were starting to close up the borders. So thinking about the data points that we had to work with and also the visuals and also the scenario that we were actually in, it ties in those points about looking at signal and being able to tell those stories. So to start talking about shifting left, shifting right, and observability, we'll talk about the traditional model that we all used to run and operate with. I'm not sure if everybody's worked on waterfall projects or if they just hear legends of them, but in the olden days when we used to work on IT projects, there was a lot of time and effort spent at the beginning of a project gathering requirements, developing the design, and doing the development work, testing and support and things just kind of thrown in a little bit at the last minute. This was the way that we ran projects in the past would chew up all of your budget at the beginning part, and then you were left with very little time to actually get everything sorted and corrected. And it also didn't leave a lot of room to get feedback from your customers as you were deploying things. So now this all seems really very obvious, and I don't have a customer in my roster at all that isn't working with this shift left mentality or isn't, working to actively implement this. This is quite an old concept. I mean, this is something that was developed in 2001, where we're looking to, do all of our testing and building and releasing things earlier and being on this like continuous loop so that you are getting feedback and you're not wasting precious time without things that are super concrete. And the concept within testing about shifting that left is that you can catch bugs earlier. It's going to save you a lot of time and money and embarrassment and heartache. So if you're pushing bugs into production and you're dealing with crises, this is almost always, something that's super, super stressful. So the earlier that you could do these things into the process, the less expensive it's going to be and the less problematic it's going to be for people. And so this is what we really actually want, which is this continuous piece. And I've heard a lot of talks about what this will actually mean from a cultural perspective, meaning that we don't have these peaks and valleys of activity, where you don't have teams that are focused on certain segments of things and then they've got longer lull times. We want to have our work planned out in a way that's predictable, manageable, and something that's not going to stress everybody out so entirely. So, the way that Marcus has described this is that what we really want to do is be really super boring. And boring is good because it means that you've got a good pulse point on what's happening. So I really like this quote because I think it applies a lot to DevOps. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And there's quite a lot of focus on time to market. That's the biggest thing. When we talk about dev, you're talking about getting things into production as fast as humanly possible. But if you want to go far, you want to go together. So that maybe addresses a little bit more of the ops side of things, where you have to have coordinated efforts and responses. And I think that there's actually a really good talk from Karen Matika. She presented for us at SauceCon. If you haven't had a chance to watch that or to review that content, she speaks to it quite well about, how it's not just being responsive to the technology, but it's also about having enough of a foundation that you feel confident to innovate and you feel confident to respond to things that you don't expect. So she tells this great story about how they had an emergency issue on a Friday evening, but because their testing was so comprehensive, they could run everything and they could propose a solution to that very, very quickly, run through all of their automated tests, and then they were able to fix something that otherwise they would have waited until Monday to actually fix and work through as a team. So I think this is quite important, and something that we miss is that we're racing towards the finish line. We also want to make sure that we are thinking about things holistically and sustainability. Okay. So as far as the journey, the feedback loop goes, we're going to talk a little bit about requirements. So we look at the real world behavior that's available. We want to make sure that we're making informed decisions about the technology. And then this in turn goes into the development cycle, where it's really understood what it is that we're trying to build. We're able to build things with a little bit more trust and confidence in those requirements. Then we start adding things into testing. So we're adding this automation suite based on those requirements, based on the stuff that we are building. And this should be continuous. And it's going into releases. So we have control over things that we're bringing into place. And then finally into monitoring and analytics, where you're able to compare those behaviors, the expected behaviors, and then the actual behaviors as well. And I like the way that Marcus had laid this out originally. So just laying it all flat so that you could see this as a progression: planning and coding, testing, the UAT side of things, releasing, monitoring, and then maintaining it. Shifting left is all about getting things handled before you get to that release point. And as soon as you can push that back into the process, the better. That's the piece where people talk about all of the cost savings that are associated with this. But shifting right is really about after you push things into production. How do you make sure that you are monitoring that? And what we want is that these two things should meet each other. So it should be continuous, as is our theme, right? And that'll just make it a little bit more predictable for you. So when we talk about observability, you've got to rely on data. And I've thrown this image in specifically because this is something that Marcus talks about quite frequently. He talks about the ocean of data that we have that comes out of testing. So you have to use data. You have to have it driven by the user signals to generate and validate those requirements. So it's about using the data to actually tell a story. So we have an example of some monitoring pieces. This is one of the Oracle monitoring pieces when it's got trends and graphs and spike lines and things of that nature. And all of it's great stuff, and it helps you kind of establish a baseline. And it's interesting that when I talk to my customers about their data, if you have those conversations continuously, your customers can tell you exactly what's happening. They can tell you, they can point to things that are event-based, and they could explain where the peaks and the valleys are coming from and what's happening, or they could tell you over time how those trends are progressing. But wouldn't it be great if that data was paired with more of that business logic versus just having that type of conversation? So this is kind of an idealized world. If we could get into the point where we're saying this is going to pair with that user behavior, and it almost imagines what's happening with those users and telling that story. My personal favorite of the data that we gather and we collect and we discuss is around the continuous testing benchmark. And I'm sure there were some discussions about our roadmap, and the things that we are releasing here at SAUCE were really quite focused around analytics. This is a piece that's near and dear to my heart, but every conversation that I have with a customer isn't about holding fast to a specific number. It's about using those data points into conversation. So for the continuous testing benchmark, we look at quality, we look at the test time run, we look at the coverage and the concurrency. The bulk of those conversations are around quality and the test runs. There's certain things that we can infer from those discussions, but it's always a point of discussion about how it's actually worked and how it's leveraged at a company. So if you want to have great discussions around this, we want to make sure that we have different perspectives represented when we're talking about the data. So it's not enough just to show the pretty charts. You have to have discussions around this, and you have to have different perspectives. This is a great time to actually bring in your marketing groups, maybe your customer success people, maybe your business analysts. And it's also a really good idea to bring in some of your executive champions. They can help you inform what's actually really important to the business. If they start to understand how your data looks and what the baseline is of that, they'll have a little bit more guidance on what to direct your teams to start working out and developing. Okay, so here's some things about observability. I'm curious to see if everybody knows this O11Y comment. It was something that I had to look up when I first started working with Marcus, but we were talking about the various things that help to increase observability. And it's not just the infrastructure piece. It's not just having this monitoring piece in place. A lot of it's about, how you're doing with your culture and that awareness that you have, that pulse point that you have with your users as well. And those are things that we track also pretty closely here at SAUCE. We've talked a lot about, and I think Valentine has even referenced this in his talk, is that you don't want to manage your own infrastructure. But when you're able to use your data in an effective way, it's going to give you other benefits. And those benefits are tied more closely to that observability point. Okay. So Marcus has shared some metaphors in here with this. What does this mean when you say that 362 tests out of 1,200 tests have failed? That's just monitoring. So it's just giving you data. But observability is going to tell you a little bit more. Observability is going to take that metric and provide some answers. What had happened and why was this problematic? So here's another metaphor. What happens when you get 1,200 tests out of 1,200 tests passing? Is that a good thing? I think the answer to that is that no one really knows. And numbers like that, I think, tend to scare people. They start to look at them and they think, is this a useful metric? So one of the things that might come out of this is that there's significant amounts of duplication. So can we trim this? Can we make something that's easier and much more manageable? Are those tests providing us value? And then the last metaphor, I was looking at passenger capacity is under 5% for this flight, but the observability is that there was some causation for this, that there were other data points, there were other things that were happening that were informing why this was going on. So just to kind of harp on this point, we want to make sure that observability is more than just infrastructure. It can't just be the monitoring. It can't just be all of the things that you're getting pulse points on. It has to be about the things that are happening within that user journey. And I believe that this is something that's actually from the Twitter's monitoring sphere. So it's quite an interesting graph. It's quite beautiful, but it really needs to be informed by, how this is actually affecting and impacting users. And the reason that this is important within quality is that we want, we have a lot of things around monitoring, and it's an action that you perform to mitigate that risk. But observability is, that description for what is happening with that system, which is helping you lower the risk. It's the understanding behind it. And we believe that people that are in QA or devs that are focused on QA are in a unique position to highlight and champion this within your organizations. It's not enough to bring your executives some set of numbers. You have to have the storytelling that goes with it. And most of that should be tied to risk, right? That's what quality is. We're looking to make sure that we've got qualifiers here. So it's not just that you're releasing a bug into production. It could be the risk of doing something or not doing something. Could be the risk of something that's late. And that's something that's very difficult to track and to measure. So sometimes there's, if you don't do anything, you're not going to have an impact from it. And so it's difficult to compare a point that exists or something that wouldn't, in theory exist. So you want to factor these types of things into your thinking as well. The risk of something being low quality, that's pretty obvious. The risk of something being the wrong thing. Maybe we've been focused on delivering enhancements or things with the product that the customers aren't really going to like or aren't really going to buy into. The risks of the market shifting. So how do we make sure that we're able to respond to things quickly? Are we prepared to be able to be responsive to things, or are our processes too slow? Is it too bureaucratic? Is it going to be too late for us to actually respond when our competitors can get to that finish line a lot faster and more smoothly than we can? So we like to think about this if you're going to describe something that's happening with the bug. And I really like this example because I feel like sometimes it's difficult to quantify this. And this is a parallel that Marcus had made that I think is quite good. This is a pretty germane statement, right? Inserting a non-printable character into this field displays an unattractive .NET stack trace to the user, right? So pretty, just a little bit mundane. But if you describe it in this way, where you say, the user sees a .NET stack trace, which allows any nefarious users to fingerprint our system, does identify security risks. And that's something that people in your organizations are really going to start to listen to. Their ears are going to perk up if they think that something that's been deployed is exposing you to unnecessary risk. It's something that you'll see a lot of support and resources to get resolved. Okay, so here's what we propose to making sure that you can get this right for shifting right. Smoke tests into production, functional performance and security testing, integration with monitoring, testing analytics that inform your post-release, full test analytics pipeline, correlating the UI test with that monitoring, and using analytics to inform requirements and using analytics to even generate tests. So I'm wondering if the audience, and I think if we had a little bit of time, I'd love to hear if there were examples of people that are using analytics to help them generate their tests, if they're using that to inform their testing strategies. Marcus gives a really good example of where, when he was at Retail Me Not, he had provided a lot of test coverage, but they found that they had paired this with the users and how the user behavior was actually focused, and they were able to prioritize things. And that's how it should work. You should be able to prioritize things that way. So what's the easiest, best path to follow for this is thinking about, what does your money want? Where are your biggest revenue makers? What are the processes that drive most of your money? And the more that you talk about this observability, the more that your product teams are going to listen to you, right? If you're talking about causes and things and problems and risks around that, you're going to have more productive conversations. And the more you talk about risk, the more your executives are going to hear you. So I think we have about 6 or 7 minutes left for Q&A. So Ryan?
Yep, we do. We have about 8 minutes. If anybody would like to ask a question, that will be a perfect time. And I'm counting on Valentine to at least throw you something.
Or maybe from Bernays. This is good.
You got it?
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the chat. We've got some Sabithas asking Valentine questions about running automated tests in production. So
you have a couple that are coming up as well. So Daleen asked, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, how do you gather your analytics?
Right. So as you're aware, SAUCELABS is a cloud-based provider of test automation. We do have all of the test points that are run from our Selenium scripts. Those test points are anonymized across our different customer bases, and we've looked at trends and some analytics in that space to make sure that we're highlighting positive behaviors. And those conversations continue to grow, especially as we've deployed these things out to our customers. So I know that Valentine has actually been quite influential when we talked about failure modes and then the rest of the insights functionality that has recently been deployed to our user base. Okay, can you choose a tool which can help with better analytics of test failures? Yes, I think our build failure analysis, if this is, we would love to talk to you offline because we have just deployed this into our beta space. And so I'm sure that there's somebody from our marketing or from our advanced team that can help with this. It's about comparing and looking at those trends and that behavior and isolating those things. So, when you're running a lot of tests, I think our team is quite focused around enablement, but part of enablement means bringing your existing testing into the fold and being able to have access to a really good baseline. We see a lot of examples of things that have been built and they're test assets that people just really want to hold on to. Our team is not focused on building up massive repositories. We want repositories that are super, super useful, and that's why we define things within shift left and shift right. We want people to be able to have that testing that's responsive, and we also want people to have that testing that's that pulse point. But that doesn't mean having tens and thousands or hundreds of thousands of automated tests. It has to be something that's quite manageable. And so what we've done with the build failure analysis is comparing a lot of those tests. And a lot of the stuff that we're finding with build failure analysis is we're looking at duplication of efforts. So where there are tests that repeat functionality, and you don't necessarily need that, and you have those things that will break. If you have duplications, breaks in one place, then it's breaking in a bunch of other places. So as much as you can streamline and maintain that, I think the better off you're going to be and more informed that you'll be able to actually action things when you see an error.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that one, so it's kind of getting back to the point of following up with that question and making sure you understand what tools are available and how they can be used. We absolutely can get in touch with you. We'll follow up after this and make sure that you're connected to the right folks that can help you on the demo side, like Stan did today, or even looking at a salesperson to understand how they can maybe create an agreement for you. Jane, one more question for you real quick.
Sure.
How do you connect monitoring in production? Now, the connect word is in quotes, so you have a little bit of leeway there how you want to answer it. But
that's good. I'm good at taking all the leeway. I think it depends on what your monitoring solutions are. And so, at Sauce, we keep everything on an open API. We see most of our customers consolidating into other platforms or other reporting platforms specifically. Ryan's actually probably the best person to answer a question that's around this just because of his background working in the DevOps space. But the point that I was trying to make about connecting that monitoring we have in production is that you want to make sure that you are getting an accurate pulse point of your user behavior. So that is something that does need to inform your testing, and it will help you sleep at night knowing that you've got a good pulse point on that. And Ryan, if you wanted to take it from there, that would be really.
So what Jane's talking about there is before joining SaaS, I spent some time at a company called New Relic, which is a production monitoring site service, primarily around things like performance monitoring, but other types of things as well. And right alongside with what Jane's talking about and what Valentine was talking about earlier about, when you get to production, how do you know that you're doing the right things? How do you know that you tested the right thing? Really what it comes down to is, look, there's tons of different monitors out there. There's tons of different ways of dashboarding those things together, bringing tables and charts in from different services into a centralized, single pane of glass, if you will. The art behind it is making sure that you're understanding the right types of metrics. So just like Valentine was talking about earlier about making sure you're testing the right things, The same thing can be done on the production side with monitoring, is making sure that you're understanding and listening to what your users are actually doing. Are they encountering issues that you hadn't tested? And should that monitor then be able to inform that test itself? One of the things that we're considering, and this is by no means a promise of a roadmap or anything, but it's something that we're talking about internally, is as we continue to develop and enhance our machine learning and artificial intelligence investment in our SaaS platform, how can we learn from those production services like monitors or other types of things that are out there to actually automatically start adjusting the tests that we're doing in pre-production or even in production itself to make sure that we're accounting for the fact that users are curious. They're going to do things differently than we had originally applied or had originally planned for. That's totally okay. In fact, we encourage that. We want that to happen because that's what makes software much more robust. So at this point, it's more about understanding and listening and bringing those data points together and thinking about it as a true DevOps organization and helping you to continue to break down those silos. Don't get stuck in the old way of thinking of QA and development and operations, but really all these things coming together is what's going to ultimately give you the best level of insight from